Hello, welcome to Scrap Time. My name's Christine, and in this video I'm going to be showing you a technique using some Distress Sprays and Distress Oxide Sprays together to form some really cool fun backgrounds. And these are a few I've been working on, and I tried to mix up my colors. So, we have greens, we have blues, pinks, yellows. Now, I also want to point out that sometimes, like this one here, you don't need to do a lot. I like the colors together and I just left it, whereas some other ones, there's like a bunch of different colors and layers. So when you're doing it and working with them, just do it until you like how it looks. If it's only a few steps and you're done, great. And if you don't want to do piles of layers, that's fine too. It's all about playing and experimenting. And each time you do it, you'll get different looks. The other thing I want to point out is it makes a difference of the tag you used or the paper. Like watercolor paper is good. The Ranger papers are made for Distress Sprays. I had some other tags that I used, and these are regular sprays, not the oxides. And you can see how the tag just sort of absorbed the ink. There was no sort of layer on it, and they're also muted that you would think they were the oxides, but these are actually just regular Distress Sprays, and they were just really muted. So I went back and I had some other tags that work better for when you're using the sprays. The other thing I want to point out is that I finally got myself the Tim Holtz Tonic Media Mat that I'll be working on. And it's a nice glass surface, so it's great. You can spray and clean up and play around. And so it's especially good because I live in a small place and I have a wooden table that's all sort of bumpy. So having a nice smooth surface that I can spray on, I can heat on and everything is really great, and it doesn't take up a lot of room. Okay, so now when I'm working on tags, I of course start with like brand new tags. But I also have some tags from my previous one at different stages, and this is how I get them to look different. I will use the leftovers to soak up some of the inks that are already there to start my next tag. So I try not to waste any of the sprays when I'm doing this on my own, and that I just keep using tags to absorb the sprays to start backgrounds. So if I'm using these, that's where those come in. I have already previously dipped them in inks. So for this one, I'm going to use some picked raspberry, abandoned coral, and squeezed lemonade. I like these three colors together. I know that they'll blend nicely and I won't get any sort of muddy areas. Now, the one thing I found with working on the black mat is you can't fully see your colors, but because of the white lines, it sort of pops there that you can see the pinks and that. So I start with a fair amount of spray, and so my first few tags I'll just put them right in, pick them up, and you can see what beautiful colors those are, and I put it aside. Now, as I said, you can do this with like watercolor paper, cards. It doesn't have to be tags. For the project I'm working on, I wanted just tags. So I'm just picking up the ink, putting it aside and then now maybe I'll swipe some ink like that. And I put that aside. And so this is what I mean. You can do a lot of tags at one time. So now that I'm getting down to a bit less, I'm going to start pulling in these tags I previously had and like start to do more layers on those tags. This is too, when it starts to get a little less, you can go in with your water. This is just Distress Sprays, so they're not going to oxide or anything, but they will water down a bit. And then there's a bit more ink there, so I'm going to take a fresh tag and just start to mop up some of that ink. And this will be a base later for me to work on. So you can see that. So when you compare to like my first to now, you can see quite the difference in color, but it's still a good, there's still ink there that I can start a base for later to add more to it. So that's what I mean. You don't want to waste any of the ink. So there we go. So I basically absorbed most of it. I'm just going to wipe off the rest. So for now, I'm going to put aside all my other ones. And just work on my main tags. I'm gonna just clean up here for now. Okay, so we'll sort of work on these together. I have a water bottle, and I'm going to just, you just sort of squeeze a little to get those droplets. And I'm going to just put a few droplets on each of those. And that will start moving the ink around, making a pattern, and I'm going to heat them. So you'll see there's some pooling in some areas with the ink. That's when I just take a cloth and just, by removing it like this too, you're forming a bit more texture onto your tags. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take Candied Apple Red. This is still just a Distress Spray stain. And I'm just going to put a little bit on there. And then I'm going to take my tags and dip. And now you can see the different type of texturing we're getting on those. And again, I want to try and use up. Now, if you find that your ink is sort of drying, again, you just go in with a bit of water. And then I can just bring in some of these other tags and soak up that. For now, though, I'm just going to wipe it off. Oh, we have a little visitor. Albie is my assistant who likes to come and craft with me sometimes. And he's off camera, but right beside me. And again, I'm going to spray a little more. And so it's all about building up layers. Our next step will be the Distress Oxide. Okay, so now we want to introduce some Distress Oxides. I think I'll first do Spiced Marmalade. Now when you're using the Distress Oxides, you want to make sure you shake them every time so the pigment is throughout the ink. And I'm going to spray this on my mat and then dip my tags. Now you'll notice that some of the other ink is coming off there, some of those oranges, because the moisture from this ink activated the ink that was on here already. Now the oxides I find will dry a little quicker, so you can spritz them with water, but now by spritzing them with water, we've sort of activated them to oxide. Hey buddy, are you gonna join the crafting? Why don't you lie down? There you go. Albie has made himself comfortable, ready to watch front row seat to all the crafting. Now this is also, I'll wet it again, where I'll get a new tag and just soak up some of that. So you can see how you can end up with many, many tags in a short amount of time. Okay. So now the one way I showed you just now was on there, but we can also just spray right onto them. So I have picked raspberry oxide. And I'm going to actually just spray onto the tags. I'm going to put a little bit of water. So now you'll see that the tags have gone sort of a lot more muted than when we started. And that's because that oxide gives it sort of that white tinge over it all. So when you're using the combination of the Distress Sprays and oxides, you want to use the sprays first, because if you put the oxides on first, your sprays are just going to absorb into them and you won't get any of those individual colors. Whereas when you put the oxides on top, then it sort of sits on top of the other colors you have there. So you always want to do, and I find you don't want to do all oxides, because then it's just a very muted tag or background. So what I like to do now, we've done many layers, is I find personally around here, I don't want that white, but sometimes because this is raised up, it doesn't get there. So I like to spray a bit of the squeezed lemonade over, and I find you can see just by putting the lemonade, the yellow, it helps to brighten the tags. That yellow gives it just that nice layer of brightness. And then if I wanted, I can go in with a little water. And then dry them again. Gonna again clean up underneath them. You can see how easy it is to clean this mat, which makes it really great for crafting. I've got a bit of, I can remove some of the excess. And there we have 5 completed tags and multiple not completed tags, ready to go on to the next step. Now, I'm going to be probably stamping on these and that, and at that point I might add a bit more distress inks to them and that. This is just sort of the start of a background to a project. It doesn't mean I'm not going to add more inks and stuff on them later, but it just gives you a way to play with the distress stains and oxide sprays together and the different looks you can get.